Welcome. My name is Garrett Hennigan. I'm a community organizer with the Washington Area Bicyclists Association. I'm really glad to see you all here for the fifth training session in our Summer Advocate Training Series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Washington, D.C.'s hyper-local form of government, the Advisory Neighborhood Commissions. Hope to have sort of a little bit of a presentation and maybe a little bit of discussion after that, give you all a good sense of what these things are, how they work, why you might want to get involved, and how. So great, let's go ahead and get started. Before we move on, just want to go through a few logistics. This session is going to be recorded. As we get started, I encourage you to find your familiarize yourself with your Zoom controls. So go ahead and find your reactions, your chat, and your mute controls. I'm sure that this is not your first video conference meeting. If it is, I don't know where you've been for the past couple of months, but welcome, I suppose. Per usual, if you're not chatting, if you're not talking, please just mute yourself. As I'm going through this first bit, let's see, how many folks do we have? Yeah, we have enough folks that a one-by-one introduction might take a little while. How about go ahead and find that chat window and throw in your name, your neighborhood, and your ANC if you happen to know it, your Advisory Neighborhood Commission. And I suppose one thing you've been doing to keep yourself sane, just to share and get a sense of who all is in the room. And actually, I should open up that chat window myself. They always seem to hide. There they are. All right, great. We have a couple of those floating in. Thank you all very much. Cool. So as we go along, if you have a question, as I'm sure you will, you can either drop it in the chat or save it for the end. If you don't know which ANC is yours, don't worry. You'll certainly know by the end of this and why that matters. As we go, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in. I'll take some pauses from time to time to see if there are any questions. And if you have any comments that are particularly relevant to anything we're talking about, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. Fantastic. You all are Zoom pros. Always good to see. And I will do my best to be checking the chat as we go. Okay. And let's see, I do have some slides to share with you all. If you would like to follow along or check these out later. That's not, I meant to click on the link. There we go. There we go. That's better. Okay, cool. So feel free to follow along. Slides are a little sloppy these days, but I think they're a good conversation starter. So just some questions to sort of gauge where we are. Hopefully you have found sort of your raise hand button. But just a few questions. So if this applies to you, please just raise your hand. So first of all, but before tonight, had you ever heard of an Advisory Neighborhood Commission? Raise that hand, or I suppose you can just raise your physical hand if you're there. Wonderful. So we got some. Okay. Did you or do you know what they do? Any hands? All right. Fewer folks aware of what they do. That's okay. You're in the right place. Have you been to an ANC meeting? Got a couple of folks to an ANC meeting, right? That's all right. How about this? Do you all know what ward you live in? Which part of the city? It starts with a number. All right, we have a few. Getting a little closer in, do you know which ANC you live in? Which Advisory Neighborhood Commission you live in? We have a few. Okay, some thumbs up. How about which, do you know an ANC commissioner, like a person who has that role? Okay, we know some of them. That's good. That's good. Do you happen to know your ANC commissioner, the person who represents you? Sometimes they're a little tough to find. Okay, cool. Well, these are just some preliminary questions. Hopefully we'll give that some context as we go. Thanks. So, to ask a very basic question, what is an advisory neighborhood commission? This is, I often, every community governs itself differently, but DC is in many ways a very different and wonderful place. I should say, if you happen to be here from a community that is not the District of Columbia, some of this might seem very foreign to you. I would say thank you so much for joining us. Some of this stuff might not seem all that pertinent because it is specifically about like the inner workings of our advisory neighborhood commissions. Some of this will be very similar to civic associations or citizens associations. But in the case of ANCs, they are DC's most local form of government. It's actually a part of the DC government. It's a body of volunteer commissioners. So depending on the neighborhood, between, I think, 3 is the smallest, and up to 11, 12. They're elected by their neighbors, serving 2-year terms. So every 2 years, every single commission turns over. Commissioners represent their single member district, which is the thing we'll talk about in a minute, but a district they represent. And each of those districts is sort of an arbitrarily drawn area that roughly, at some point, had about 2,000 people in it. That number changes because, of course, the city grows and it shrinks. And so some of them at this point are nearly double that, but still represented by one person. Some of them have shrunk a bit, yet still represented by one person. Thing to note is that as the census is happening, those boundaries are going to be redrawn in a couple of years. So generally, what's the scope of this? So DC has 8 wards, which each has a council member. That's one layer of government. The council members sort of sit at the same layer as the DC mayor. But in terms of ANCs, the city has about 40 of them spread throughout those 8 wards. And within those ANCs, there's about 360, I forget the exact number, it might be higher, single member districts. So and that means there's that same number of elected representatives at that sort of level of government. So it's quite a lot of bodies, it's quite a lot of people, and it's a hard thing to keep tabs on. But for you, the important thing for you to know is that you have a commissioner who represents you, and they sit on a commission that represents sort of your neighborhood and the neighborhoods around it. So that's what they do. Let's dive in a little bit and see what that looks like. So this is Washington, DC. This is, I believe, the most up-to-date ward map. It changed in 2013, and it's actually pretty obnoxiously hard to get an accurate map of the city because the ward lines were redrawn with the census. As an exercise, we're going to go and find WABA's office, which right now is closed, but the building's still there. So we're in Ward 1, which is here in orange, or salmon colored, in Adams Morgan. So that's our neighborhood. And we are right there. So Ward 1 is our ward. Diving in a little bit closer, this is a map of Ward 1. And we are in Advisory Neighborhood Commission 1C. And as you can see, there are 3 other ANCs for Ward 1. And we're right down there in 1C in Adams Morgan. And going a level even further, we are in single member district ANC 1C06, or single member district 1C06. That district is represented by Commissioner Wright. And that's like, if I lived there, that's the person I'd be going to about issues in my neighborhood. If you are curious and want to look this up for yourself, I will put in the chat a great tool. For looking up your advisory neighborhood commission. So all you got to do there is put in your address at the top left corner, and it will give you a box that looks very much like this one that you see here. That will tell you what your commission is, where you can find more information about that commission, specifically their website, and who your single member district commissioner is, and actually some contact info. Most of it is up to date. So yeah, it's helpful to know actually who that person is and connect to the face. Any questions on that before we move on? And you can either do those in the chat or by unmuting yourself and asking. And I will pause for just a minute because it can be tough to find that unmute button. Okay, great, no questions. We will move on then. So everyone has an ANC commission. Everybody has a single member district representative. Let's talk about what they do. This is a rather boring list, but generally ANCs as a very hyper-local form of government. There is a question here. As an ANC commissioner, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much. We may have, oh, that was a private message. Wonderful. So what do ANCs actually do? There is actually their role is sort of set in statute by law. They are by the DC's Home Rule Act. They were given some very specific responsibilities, but advisory neighborhood commissions are an advisory role. So it is their job to sort of give a local perspective, a local neighborhood or community perspective on actions that the government is planning to take, that the DC government is planning to take. So they advise the DC government. The law spells out basically two things: that before, say, the Department of Transportation is going to change the design of a street, they have to let the ANC know. They have to give them notice, say, hey, we're thinking about making this change. And then they have to give them time to respond. And then if that ANC does choose to respond, choose to give some advice or comment on a proposed action, then a DC agency has to actually give it what's called great weight. That's often put in quotation marks because while it is put into law, it is not explicitly spelled out exactly what great weight means. So it's open to some interpretation. In some cases, let's say the district's Department of Transportation wanted to put up some bike lanes on a particular street. They would give the ANC notice, say, hey, we're going to put some bike lanes on this street. What do you think about this plan? The ANC could choose either to support it. They could say, hey, this looks great. Support it with maybe some conditions, say, we like the idea generally, but we want you to change this, this, and this. Or, as is sometimes the case, they might come out and say, you know, we don't think this is a good idea for our community. We don't want bike lanes here. That is advice. It's not the final say. But what DDOT in that case would then have to do is sort of give that advice, give that great weight. So consider it closely, which turns out in some cases to be taking it, giving it so much weight that they just follow it completely. So you don't want this bike lane? Okay, we won't put it in. In other cases, it means doing a little more sort of intentional follow-up and justification of an action if the ANC happens to disagree. So DDOT might, put in writing a further justification of why this bike lane is really important for this particular place, even despite the ANC's objections. In most cases, an ANC will sort of come somewhere in the middle. We support this, but we have some suggestions, and DDOT often will say, hey, those are great ideas. You can look up that law if you like. It's part of the Home Rule Act. It's a little bit wonky, Exactly how those ANCs do sort of the process of giving that advice depends. There are, as I said, about 40 of them. Each of them has a lot of history, is made up of different people, has sort of different customs. So exactly the process for each of them, it'll depend. And that to learn that sort of takes you getting, spending some time there. But generally, they by holding public meetings. They are, I think, required to hold 10 meetings a month, 10 meetings a year. So they typically take some breaks. And those meetings are open to the public. In the before times, those would be held in community centers and libraries. And nowadays, a lot of them are happening on like WebEx and Zoom, which means participation looks very different. And at those meetings, generally, these are community forums, but in terms of them making decisions and giving advice on things, the commissioners will discuss and vote on resolutions to take a position. I think a thing that's important to note about that sense of great weight, if an individual commissioner, say your commissioner, took a position on a project or a thing that was going to happen in the neighborhood, in that case, they'd be acting that their voice is equal to yours in terms of how a government agency would regard it. But when they pass a resolution or send a letter as a commission, having voted on it, then it takes sort of an additional level of importance and will be regarded with more weight. So the great weight goes to the commission, not the individuals. Okay, so that's what they do. And a little more detail on sort of what specifically they work on. What are some of the areas that these commissions may weigh in on, and why does it matter to us? So a few common areas: street changes. Literally any time that the district government wants to make a change to the use, function, design, or sort of apportionment of our street or public spaces, they will, by law, have to give all of the ANCs that are affected, that have jurisdiction in that area, they'll have to give them notice, give them time to comment, and give their response great weight. So any proposed bike lane, any proposed change in parking, even parking signs, will typically go before an ANC. So for folks working towards safe streets, trying to get more traffic calming in our neighborhoods, trying to get more bike lanes, protected bike lanes and trails, very commonly, just about every single project will at some point come before an advisory neighborhood commission. And that can either be a chance for them to say, hey, this is great, we love it, keep going, go quickly, build this as fast as possible. Or it's a chance for them to, throw on the brakes. So the engagement that ANC gets sort of before a decision is in front of them is important. Other common areas: development and zoning, planned unit developments, zoning changes, sort of development review of any projects, any big developments happening in the neighborhood will go before an ANC. And also specifically licenses for businesses to use public space or get an alcohol license. Restaurants will often spend quite a lot of time sort of negotiating with an ANC over terms for them to support an alcohol license, often involving hours and things. It gets very detailed. And there may be other areas, but those are the main ones that we see. And the main one that I focus on is on street changes. Any questions on that before we move on? Great. I'm gonna take a sip of water. Okay, so sometimes so generally, what do ANCs do? They They bring people together for meetings, they have discussions, they vote on resolutions. Especially in the neighborhoods that have changed a lot in the past 10 years, that workload of like, where there may be dozens of cranes up in the neighborhood, where there may be lots of changes to improve street safety proposed, that can be a huge workload for the 5 to 12 commissioners, and it makes those ANC meetings drag on quite a long time. So a lot of ANCs have actually set up committees tasked with specific purposes. I've just listed a few here, and they all have different names, but generally it's the same set of categories. The general idea here is that the ANC may meet monthly, but these committees can have sort of a membership of their own, and they can meet beforehand. And so in the case of transportation, maybe they'll get a presentation about a particular bike lane project or a traffic calming project before the next ANC meeting. They'll hash out a lot of the details. They'll get the detailed questions asked and answered. That committee will come up with a proposal or sort of will come up with an opinion of their own. Sometimes they even take votes on things. Again, different ones work different ways. And then make a recommendation to the full body of the ANC for their action to support or oppose or somewhere in the middle. It can be, especially for a lot of the safe streets projects that we work on, trying to get more protected bike lanes built around the district. An ANC with a transportation committee is often a really great opportunity to get to know folks and get to know the projects and get a good clear sign of support before it goes before the full ANC. It's also a good time to give input. The membership of those groups actually is a pretty great opportunity if you're really into these kinds of things, if you're really interested in the changes happening in your neighborhood and want to support more protected bike lanes or safe streets. The membership is often appointed by the full ANC. They are often, most commonly, members of the public who live in the neighborhood who have a particular interest or expertise in the subject matter. And that includes the chair sometimes. So if you or someone is really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of street changes in your neighborhood, take a look at your ANC, see if they have a transportation and public space committee, because it might be a great place to meet other folks working for similar things in your neighborhood. It might be a great place to push some of these projects forward and just keep better tabs on what's happening. So there are committees. Any questions on committees? Okay, great. Y'all been quite quiet today. So ANC meetings are like the bread and butter of what what ANC commissioners often do in public, but it is just the surface of what one of these people might do in service as a commissioner. But ANC meetings, they typically happen roughly monthly. Again, they take breaks during, well, some months of the year. It depends on the commission. They're noticed on the ANC website. So most ANCs have a functional website. There are varying degrees of functionality. And just a quick Google will find it. Usually it's something like anc4b.org or something like that. And on that website, you'll find agendas, you'll find meeting dates, you'll find contact info for the commissioners. So a good, also maps, so you can see where the boundary lines actually are. All of those meetings will have an agenda that's set well before the meeting starts, which can be helpful. Sometimes these meetings last a wee bit of time, upwards of 3 hours. So if there's nothing on the agenda that's particularly interesting to you, you might not want to show up. But the agendas can help you, plan out your time. Some wonderful ANCs actually set times for those agenda items so that you can look at it and see, well, the meeting starts at 7 p.m., but at 8:45, the thing I'm interested will be discussed. interested in will be discussed, so it can help you plan out your time. And especially nowadays that these meetings are happening online because we can't meet in person, participating in them is a whole different matter. It's a whole lot easier, as I'm sure you all know. I can only imagine what some of you are doing to multitask right now. So they're open to the public, which is important. This is sort of those commissioners' chance to sit in a room with the rest of the commission and debate things and take public votes on things. They will typically, every commission does it differently, but they'll typically set aside time for community announcements, and also time separately for community concerns, a chance for a member of the community to stand up and say, hey, I want to bring an issue to the council, sorry, the commission's attention. And they may, depending on what's on the agenda, they may provide some time for community discussion on a particular agenda item. It's not always the most productive if it's a debate, but sometimes there's time to discuss that. So ANC meetings, that's literally when the decisions happen. But a whole lot of work might go into those decisions before they happen. So just a few reasons why you might want to show up to one of these ANC meetings. Quite often it's a chance to get presentations on some of the things happening or proposed to happen in the neighborhood. Again, about street changes, development. There's often representatives from council members and the mayor who show up and give brief updates. But if there's a particular, protected bike lane project you're interested in, this might be a good place to see that presentation. The ANC might be just discussing a project generally without planning to take a vote. So you can sort of give some input on that, give them something to chew on before a future vote. Or they may actually be taking a vote on a resolution and sort of hashing out the resolution language there on the dais. And while they do take meeting minutes, sometimes you have to be in the room where it happens, as they say, which apparently is the title of a new book. So yeah, ANC meetings can be quite exciting sometimes. Wanted to talk briefly about your commissioner, giving you tools to look them up, and places where to find them. This is a person who was elected by neighbors, potentially by you. I think it's worth noting that of all of those commissioners, the vast majority run unopposed. So I think it's less than a quarter of the elections are actually competitive, where two people are running for the same seat, which I suppose is a plug to say, if you're at all interested, it is a process, it is a time commitment, but you should consider it because it's a great way of giving back to your community and making change that you might want to see. That commissioner is there to represent you. That is their job. They may have other opinions, but they are also there to represent you and make decisions for the greater good of the entire District of Columbia, not just their residents. In theory, they should be responsive and open to input, though that absolutely varies. And I think another important thing is if they can often be a great resource for connecting you with city resources, helping address community concerns or issues. They often know the best person at a particular agency to get in touch with about addressing an issue. So good to reach out to them if you have an issue you want to resolve. The thing I wanted to absolutely highlight is that every ANC commissioner is an unpaid, often unthanked volunteer human being with limited time, with a completely separate job that is unrelated. So I say that because these folks can often be amazing allies. Sometimes they can be opponents, but at the end of the day, they are human beings who live in your neighborhood who probably care about the very same things that you do. So it's important that we keep that in mind anytime we interact with them. So given sort of the purview of what they do, given that almost every protected bike lane, every street change will come before them, it really does behoove us to start a relationship with your commissioner, to reach out, say, hey, I'm your neighbor, you represent me. I would love to chat. Everybody does it differently. Some of them hold office hours. Some commissioners hold specific meetings at sort of regular times just for their single member district. Others, everybody has a different way of sort of getting in touch with folks. I see not my commissioner, but a neighboring commissioner at the farmer's market every weekend, and it's a good chance to just catch up and chat. I think another important thing to note is that if your particular commissioner is not easy to get a hold of, try a neighboring commissioner. Keep talking with folks until you find someone who's responsive and willing to talk about the particular issue you're working on. And in fact, I did reach out to a few commissioners just to ask the question, like, what are the best ways for a resident to give input, to get in touch with you and let you know what they think about a particular issue you might be taking a vote on, or to bring up something completely new. So just reached out. This is not at all a representative sample. I don't even know exactly who answered. But a quick poll, it seems like most people, the majority, really prefer a short email. Every commissioner has an email address, which you can find on that web map. Some of them use their official email address. Some of them prefer to use their personal address. You'll kind of figure that out as you go. Most of them prefer a short email. Just quickly tell me who you are, that I represent you, and a quick pitch of what it is that you'd like me to know around a particular decision they're making, or sort of the background that's important to you. You can read a few of the specific suggestions up here, but yeah, I thought that might be helpful. So more or less, that was sort of the overview that I wanted to make sure to give you all. I will again, every commission works differently. Every commission is going to be working and focusing on different issues. Some traffic safety is a huge focus, whereas others, they are squarely focused on supporting, schools and working on community safety of a different kind. So every one of them has sort of a different focus, but this is how you get in touch with them. So I suppose at that point, if you all have any questions, if there are any topics you wanted to go through that I didn't cover at all, please feel free to jump in and let's chat. And a great question from Jason. He asks, how do you deal with commissioners who are pro-car and won't give us any parking space in order to provide bikes and bike lanes, bike lanes and bus lanes? Additionally, there are long-term prominent figures in the city and great respect and weight for their own opinion, not necessarily that of the commission. Thanks for bringing it straight into bikes and bus lanes. This is a very, common issue. Commissioners serve 2-year terms, but there are quite a few who have been continually getting reelected and reelected and reelected. They may be pillars of their community. They just happen to disagree with us and potentially some of their neighbors about what the best use of street space is, whether it should be for driving or parking cars or getting around other safe ways. This is a process, first of all, right? I think that the best way is, first of all, to make it if you can, try to start up a relationship with this person. If you happen to see them at a farmer's market, try to strike up a conversation. Try emails, and basically, you're probably not going to get it to a point of agreement. But I think a good goal is to help them understand where you're coming from. Why, say, traffic calming, why bike lanes, why bus lanes are a good thing for the neighborhood, for their neighbors, even if it doesn't necessarily benefit that commission. Sorry, that commissioner. I think it's also a good opportunity to, start with education. Start with helping them understand your position. Also talk to the rest of the folks on their commission. Quite often opinions change. New people come in with new ideas. They shake things up that were previously sort of, unshakable. And commissions don't, act unanimously all the time. Sometimes those decisions are very tenuous. So sometimes you might have to do a little bit of creative whip counting on issues, which we do all the time. Sometimes, if a thing squeaks by one vote, it's still a win, that we'd prefer to do things unanimously. Kira says, and find someone to run against them. That's also a perhaps another solution, which can be very effective. Just an interesting exercise. The DC Board of Elections does have since these are official DC elections, you can find the election results from all past ANC races. And, sometimes literally it's just a few folks voted for somebody, or they're winning by, in some cases, like a single vote, or a write-in candidate, So it's interesting to look at that. Just as an FYI, while I can absolutely encourage everyone to run for ANC, WABA is a 501c3. We do not do endorsements or get involved in elections in terms of promoting a single candidate or a group of candidates. Though this past election, we did do sort of more of a forum for all of the candidates for DC Council. Greater Washington often does, they do endorsements, and they often do a pretty thorough ANC sort of rating effort. Okay, that's enough of me talking. Yes, and filing deadlines. Thanks. Any other questions? Feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, say hi.
So Gary, you have another one, but I would just say that DDOT has not given ANC's great weight for last report by the office of I'll forget the name of the council for DC, but they said they do not give us great weight. They listened to nothing we had to say about the 14th Street project, and it's going forward anyway. So to answer probably the question that Kira has, we're supposed to have more weight than just as constituent alone, but we don't always get that. So feel free to do both. Reach out to the ANC commissioner and reach out directly to the department.
Yes, a great point and a great question. So I think it's important to understand sort of the greater context of let's say, a protected bike lane project or a bus lane project. There are lots of pressures, lots of stakeholders. ANCs may have a weightier voice, but they don't outweigh everything. So I think it really depends on the politics of the matter. If there's enough pressure and enough sort of important voices saying we need to do this thing, quite often, the agency staff will decide we're going to go against what the ANC asked, but we have to justify it, and they have to give a written response. Not that written response is always, much more than, hey, we decided to do the other thing. But it depends. In plenty of cases, and there's a frustrating number, great plan, very well thought through. The staff have sort of weighed all the pluses and negatives and tried to balance out, try to, keep as many parking spaces as possible. But for reasons, the ANC decides to weigh in against it. And that sent, DDOT packing. In some cases, like a council member may agree with the ANC, follow their lead. So it's really context dependent. Generally, when I'm looking at a particular project, I like to think of those two decisions as two separate issues to work with. So when I'm looking at DDOT, I want them to choose to move ahead with protected bike lane. So as I'm looking at building an advocacy strategy, I'm thinking, who are doing some power mapping? Who's the decision maker at DDOT? Who are they going to listen to? What voices can I rally together to convince that decision maker to move ahead? Separately, I'm also looking at the ANC and thinking, who are the main stakeholders here? Who are all these commissioners? Who do they listen to? How can I rally together residents who live in that ANC to reach out to their commissioner and say, really need your support on this. Here's why, and keep on them. So it's two different decision makers. Sometimes the ANC is almost the final say, sometimes not. I hope that answered the question.
I just had a quick question. Sorry, my screen went a little wacky. So, and I'm eating dinner, so that's why I'm not on my video.
Right.
Don't think you want to see me eating. Anyway, just generically, do you have an update on any kind of street closures with part of the safe streets or open streets or whatever it's called? And then also, I've been taking advantage of Rock Creek Park, Beach Drive. I talked to a park police person. The best answer he could tell me as far as whether it would fully reopen to cars was they're looking at all the details about it and they're trying to be very cautious about it. So for now, it's still closed off to cars as a throughway, but I don't know how much longer that's going to be. So if you have any insight on, how much longer that's going to be and what we can do to advocate to keep Rock Creek Park and Beach Drive open to cyclists and pedestrians.
Great, two fantastic questions. I will try to keep them in mind. First off, Rock Creek Park. Great question. I think what they've committed to at this point is keeping it as is, extending the weekend closure 7 days a week. I think the last date I saw was July 24th. I'm hoping it wasn't June 24th. I believe it was July 24th. Now, around who's making that decision and what influence we have over it, that is the National Park Service that owns the land, and it's the United States Park Police that has jurisdiction over all the traffic patterns. That's the same traffic police that have been in the news for brutalizing district residents. So it's and actually the parks, a little aside, the Park Service, it does not have any authority over the U.S. Park Police. The U.S. Park Police reports up to the Secretary of the Interior, sort of on the same tree as the Park Service, but on the same rung, the same level. They don't. Anyway, so in terms of what we can do, it's a very potentially complicated. It's a bit of a black box, hard to know exactly how that decision was made in the first place. We know that we were making that request pretty frequently and with as many voices as we could to Park Service and Park Police before it was closed, but nothing really happened until Mayor Bowser weighed in and made that request as well. So I would say stay tuned. It's something that we're thinking about quite closely. We might have an action alert sometime soon to try to mobilize folks. But folks in Congress, they have much more authority than our advisory neighborhood commissions do right now on what the Park Service is doing and what the Park Police do. Eleanor Holmes Norton is a great person to reach out to. She may not have a vote yet on this, many things, but she's a great ally. And ask Mayor Bowser for it. Say, hey, I love this. This is wonderful. Let's make this permanent, or at least keep it extended. Now on to the other question, which was about slow streets. So as part of the sort of phase 1 reopening, which I think we're in the middle of right now, the mayor and DDOT announced what they're calling a slow streets initiative. So they identified a bunch of streets across the city, at least one in each, well, right now one in each ward, totaling at about 5 miles, but they've said they'll get up to about 20 miles across the city, of basically streets that will be designated as local traffic only, and the speed limit drops down to 15 miles an hour. The idea being that these are going to be great spaces for walking, biking, running, jogging, street hockey, whatever you might want to do on your street, but instead of being crammed on the sidewalks, out in the middle of the street. Slower traffic, local traffic only. They'll be marked with signage and some light barriers, and they are just starting to roll out those 5 miles, which they initially announced. Seen a few photos. It's very similar to what you might have seen in Seattle or in Oakland, or in many other cities that did these things like months ago. So they put out a map of 5 miles. They've said that they're going to do more, and details have sort of been slowly rolling out. Separate from that, the DC Council did pass emergency legislation directing DDOT to be a little more ambitious with that slow streets effort. So not just looking at residential streets that already have low traffic, but they also directed the agency to look at major corridors that are often very, very busy with car traffic, and directed them to expand sidewalks in those places, but also to repurpose driving lanes and parking lanes for protected bike lanes. It directs them to create a report of where those could be done, and to start implementing them. This was just passed, I think, last week. We're still trying to figure out exactly, I'm sure the agency is still trying to figure out how to respond. But up to this point, they had not committed in any way to like rolling out temporary emergency protected bike lanes or the like. So we'll see how that goes. In terms of the slow streets, advisory neighborhood commissions are explicitly encouraged to give input on where there should be. So, if there's a street in your neighborhood that can both serve as sort of a great recreation option, but also serve some sort of transportation connectivity, helps people get from one place to another, to important destinations, to grocery stores, to, metro stations, things like that. Those may be good candidates. Right now, they're not looking at streets that have bus routes because of the complications there. And they're looking at what's designated as local streets in DC. So these are basically, think of the quietest streets in your neighborhood. And those are the ones that are sort of being considered right now. It was a long-winded answer to the question, I hope. Wonderful. Great, and thank you for that article. The Slow Streets Initiative, actually, that website actually has a map linked there. I think if you scroll down, there's a link to a map. It's at this point, 1 street per ward, which doesn't look like much of a network right now. So more to come. I'm happy to stick around for a few more if y'all have questions. Any more questions? For those of you rolling out, thanks very much for coming. Oh, actually, for those of you running out, I did want to quickly mention that we are doing a few more of these trainings. We had to reschedule the training on making the case for a project. This is all about sort of talking points and framing projects as beneficial for everyone. And next week, going to do one on sort of the process of how these decisions are made, looking at DDOT and how they get, a project from sort of idea to a construction project and opportunities for input. And then followed by a little more on sort of some of the planning you might want to do to run a successful campaign for changing a street. And you can see all of those events and many, many more at waba.org/fun, which is a place for all of our events. All of them are at 6:30 p.m. I think we had some confusion on that last week, which I regret, but all of them are at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday. And all are on Zoom.
Will the password be the same or different? I had to sign up again to get the passcode this time.
It will probably be a different passcode. But if you check waba.org/fun, there's a different page for each event. So sorry for that, for making you jump through a hoop.
Oh, okay, I registered again and I got in, so that's fine. So thanks.
It might be the same password. I don't know.
I guess one more thing here. Are the speed limits going down to 20 wherever they're 25 right now? Or is that just some areas being lowered to 20? I know 15 is special, but 20 I think is the main speed limit.
Right, so 15 miles an hour is special just for those streets that are designated as slow streets.
Okay.
The speed limit, the default speed limit was just dropped in the city to 20 miles an hour, down from 25. This is kind of a tricky thing. Basically, the default speed limit for the city is if you're standing on a street and you don't see a street sign, you should assume it's 20 miles an hour. This gets confusing because on some streets that are 25 miles an hour, they've opted to put in 25-mile-an-hour speed limit signs just to remind people. So some streets will be getting new 20-mile-an-hour street signs. Many of the bigger corridors, like the Connecticut Avenues and the 16th streets that are signed at higher speeds, like 30, in some cases 35 miles an hour. At the moment, those are not going to change. However, something we are definitely going to be trying to do is getting the city to reassess those speed limits. If the floor is lower, because we know that speeding is a huge contributor to crashes and crash severity. If the floor is lower, we should also be bringing down the ceiling. Just because lots and lots of cars drive on 16th Street does not mean that it should be fatal if you happen to get hit by a car driving on 16th Street. So more to come. And on that, that change was made by basically an emergency rulemaking, a little bit nitty gritty. That was made by an emergency rulemaking, which sort of expires after a certain number of days. I think it's about 170 days. But there is a proposal to make it permanent. And there is actually a comment period on that. So if you're interested in writing a letter to the city saying, I support slower speed limits, let me know and I'll give you the details about it.
As Brian mentioned, I did testify on the no right turn on red too. So when I first heard the 20 miles, I was worried that the other right turn on red wasn't in there, but now that I know it's an emergency measure, I'm hoping that we still have a chance to stop AAA from letting people turn right on red.
Yes, so there was legislation, or rather there is legislation that is sitting in the council waiting for a markup, which did propose lowering the speed limit and right turn on red and a host of other changes. That legislation is still in process. This happened completely separately. This is the mayor and her administration deciding to do this of their own volition. So it's still a process. The council still gets to weigh in on the decision. They could choose to upend it. I don't think that will happen, but that's why it's important to send in some comments saying, I support this. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're at about time, about 7:30. Thank you all so much for coming. It was a bit of a rambling discussion. I hope you all learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And this training, along with others, will be up available online soon. We're still figuring out exactly where to put them, but they'll be there soon. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, Pat.